Now, if I had to pick one melody that just about every human being on the planet knows, it would have to be Beethoven's Ninth. The melody is beautiful and simple. In fact, its apparent simplicity is exactly the thing that makes it so beautiful. But this simplicity is only on the surface. Underneath, Beethoven's melody is like a well-planned, extremely organized military mission. There are repetitions, variations, and symmetries that only become apparent after deeper inspection. The melody is so good, in fact, that Beethoven felt it necessary to stand on its own, played by cello and bass as its first iteration, with no harmony underneath. So let's look at the melody. Let's start from big to small here so you can understand everything that is going on. Beethoven has written this melody as a specific main theme type called small ternary form. Small ternary form has three sections: the exposition, the contrasting middle, and the recapitulation. The first part of his theme is the 8-bar exposition. Now this is written as a period, and a period consists of two parts, the antecedent and the consequent. The antecedent is made up of a basic idea and a contrasting idea. Here, Beethoven has written a basic idea that moves up a third in stepwise motion and then back down. This is what I like to call a scale line melody and will be covered extensively later on in this course. The contrasting idea also moves up using a scale line, but then mixes things up a little bit with a dotted rhythm. Notice the general symmetry between the two ideas. Next comes the consequent. In classical form, the consequent consists of a repetition of the basic idea and then a new contrasting idea that moves into a cadence. For the consequent, Beethoven repeats just about everything with the exception of changing the last note from E to D. Now, after the consequent comes the contrasting middle. The contrasting middle normally focuses its efforts on the dominant harmony of the theme. What I find amazing is Beethoven takes the rhythmic idea from the first bar of the exposition and uses it for the contrasting middle by changing the notes and focusing around the E. He then takes that rhythm and transforms it by adding eighth notes to it, giving it more drive and leading into the half cadence. He also starts to use leaps for the first time, which adds energy to the melody. Finally, he ties in the contrasting middle and recapitulation by anticipating the first note of the recapitulation a beat early. But this has an added layer of rhythmic symmetry and mirroring that only becomes apparent when you actually analyze the melody. The recapitulation from then on is the same as the consequent phrase of the exposition. So now let's look at a few details. The basic idea opens with this figure of the half note and two quarter notes. As I said earlier, the figure is a scale line melody rising a third. What's interesting here is because of its simplicity, Beethoven can use this rhythmic idea in three different ways. First as the basic idea, then the contrasting idea, and then as the first bar of the contrasting middle section. Note the downbeat always has a chord tone on it. The first time he starts with the F sharp, the third of the tonic. This gives the melody a feeling of wanting to move right from the beginning. Now as he moves to the next version, he starts with the tonic, which gives it a calmer feeling. And finally, in the contrasting middle, he starts with the E, which is the fifth note on the dominant chord. The next figure is the second part of the basic idea and is found 3 times in the melody. The rhythm in this is called regular because it's all the same rhythm, quarter notes. We'll talk more about rhythm in later lessons. It also has chord tones on the strong beats, which should be standing out kind of as a recurring theme to you right now. The next figure I want to talk about is found in the contrasting middle section. You can see the figure has a slightly more irregular feel to it, given the eighth notes before the 2 quarter notes. But overall, the rhythm is still considered regular. Beethoven wants to hang around the E, so in the first use of the figure, he surrounds the E with the last 2 notes, F sharp and D, which brings him back to the E. But the second time around, he changes that D to an E, which allows him to keep on moving. What's more interesting is that you can see the progression happening before your eyes, or really before your ears, from the initial rhythm to the more driving rhythm. So it sounds like this. The last figure we'll look at is at the end of the contrasting middle and the beginning of the recapitulation. Beethoven uses two techniques here. First, he uses anticipation with the first note of the recapitulation arriving a beat early. This leads to the second, which is symmetrical rhythm. The two techniques fuse together to create a lot of momentum to finish off the melody. What I find so interesting about the melody is its ability to hold up under any sort of accompaniment or style that can be thrown at it. Obviously here Beethoven has used the melody alone as a single line, then kind of with this peaceful counterpoint underneath, then again as a march, and finally with the entire full orchestra and choir. But that's not the end of it. I've heard this as a jazz quintet piece, a rock piece, as a children's tune. You've probably had to sing it at some point in your life, and if you haven't, I guarantee you'll be singing it by the end of this lesson. Now, a great melody like this has the ability to become many different things and stick in your head. As I said earlier, don't let its apparent simplicity fool you. There's a lot going on under the hood. But it isn't a mystery either. Beethoven has used techniques that are learnable. So now let's move on with the next part of this lesson, where we're going to start getting into the real details of creating your own melodies.